this is kind of firing up. I was all jacked up, man. When I came across the Minnesota border driving down tonight, holy smokes, I see a lot of pheasants. I saw more pheasants, I think, in this drive down than I have, honestly, in a whole year. And it was really cool, too, because when I was going through an area with a bunch of pheasants, and there was actually, of all things, a beaver in the ditch. It was about a block away from a little stream, you know, and a culvert, I guess, or a bridge. But there was a beaver in the ditch making its way towards, I guess, the ice. Beaver this time of year, I'm not used to seeing that, right? But anyway, just so much wildlife. It's really a neat area. There we go. Now we're fired up. Okay, so maybe I'll just give you a brief background of everybody's got a fishing history, right? And I do as well. And you know, I'm from St. Cloud, Minnesota. That's my home, central Minnesota. And probably like many of you, ever since I could walk, I started fishing. And I mean, all I could ever think of was fishing. You know, for the Minnesota fishing opener, I couldn't sleep the night before. So finally, when I was old enough, I just go fishing at midnight, fish all night, because I couldn't sleep anyway. And yeah, it's always been a passion of mine. And lo and behold, you know, throughout my life, I've always been, you know, involved with fishing. I became a fishing guide. I got my captain's license actually when I had a corporate job down in Cleveland, Ohio, and of course that's where Lake Erie is. So I became a first mate on Lake Erie. Eventually got my captain's license on Lake Erie, and of course I've maintained that now for about 15 years. Came back to Minnesota, and you know, had a couple of different jobs and such. And at one point in time, Lake of the Woods Tourism called me, and they said, "Hey, we'd like to chat with you about an opportunity we have." And I'd gone to Lake of the Woods on my own, just because it was a good fishery. You know, I'd come home from working in Cleveland. I need a little mental break, so I'd hang out with my family for a few days in St. Cloud area, and then December 26th, I'd be shooting north. And I kind of made my mind up that I'm going to head to Lake of the Woods just because I've experienced such good fishing there. My thought is if I'm going to take time off, and if I'm going to drive anywhere and stay overnight, I might as well drive an extra couple of hours and have the opportunity to catch a lot of fish. I got my saugers, I got trophy fish. You never know what you're going to catch on Lake of the Woods. It's the same. It could be a pout, it could be a sturgeon, it could be a 31-inch walleye. You just never know. And it could be the next hook set, literally. So I started fishing Lake of the Woods for many years, and I met some resort owners, and my name came up, I guess. And so for the last 11 years, I've been the executive director of tourism for Lake of the Woods. Really, my role is to promote the area. And to me, promotion isn't as much sales as it is education, and then just helping people understand the area. If people understand the area, they're going to come up and hopefully have a good experience, and maybe they'll even keep coming back for many years to come. So with that being said, let's get rocking here. I wanted to give you a rundown of Lake of the Woods, and I thought what I would do is I would break it down by season, and we would just go from season to season to talk about the different areas, what opportunities there are, and then towards the end, I'm going to highlight one technique that you can fish anywhere, including this area, and that's pulling spinners, pulling crawler harnesses. I've done very well pulling spinners both as a guide and also as a tournament angler, and I decided I would share some tips with you that I've learned along the way that hopefully help you become a better walleye angler. So let's get rocking here. I'm going to step on this side, might be a little easier for me. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to talk about location and stats of Lake of the Woods. We're going to talk, like I said, fishing by the season. We're going to dial in some crawler harnesses. At the end, I'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. Now, if anybody has questions along the way here, this is very informal, so feel free just to fire away. So, Lake of the Woods. When you think of Lake of the Woods, it's so big. I like to look at it as there's three fisheries in one. The first part of Lake of the Woods is called the Rainy River. And the Rainy River, and I know some of you might be able to see, but the Rainy River feeds Lake of the Woods from the, I guess from the east and from the south. The Rainy River in its own right is a very, very good fishery. You probably heard of the Rainy River for spring walleye fishing, fall walleye fishing, and also sturgeon. Really a productive fishery. That feeds Lake of the Woods. The second part of Lake of the Woods is called Big Traverse Bay. Now when you look at the map, Big Traverse Bay is that great big open part of the water there. That's approximately 30 miles north-south by about 25 miles east-west. It is really big water. And it's like a Great Lake, right? And you know, the deepest spot in that whole basin is only 38 feet deep. So the whole thing is prolific. The whole thing is full of life. We joke around about it. We say, you know what, if you could take a push pin and just go on a map right now and put a pin anywhere in that basin, as long as it's not 2 feet of water or something, but I mean, anywhere out in the middle, you know, you could put a push pin and we could go set up a fish house, we're probably going to catch some fish. That's how prolific Lake of the Woods is. It's really an incredible fishery. The third part of Lake of the Woods is called the Northwest Angle. Now the Northwest Angle, if you look at that map, it's that little tip of Minnesota that sticks up into Canada. The Northwest Angle, it's the northernmost point of the contiguous United States. It's where the 14,552 islands of Lake of the Woods begin. And we have about 15 resorts up on that end of the lake. On the south end of the lake, we have about 50 lodging facilities. Airbnbs, VRBOs, hotels, resorts, you know. And then up north we have 15. Kind of interesting little fact. So that little tip of Minnesota, the reason there's that little tip, it kind of looks out of place, doesn't it? Like something, why didn't it go straight across? How come there's that tip? Well, back when they were doing the treaties and signing the treaties, they had agreed that the United States would get the spot of land where the Mississippi River began. Well, back then they thought the Mississippi River began up at Angle Inlet. Truth be known, the Mississippi River, as you know, starts out on Lake Itasca, which is about 3 hours south of Lake of the Woods, or 2.5 hours south of Lake of the Woods. So that was a mistake, but you know, they didn't notice the mistake until after the ink was dry for over a year. So guess what? We kept the Northwest Angle. If you drive to the Northwest Angle, the Northwest Angle is one of 4 exclaves across the U.S.-Canada border. An exclave is a piece of land that if you drive to your own country, you have to drive through another country to get there. Hyder, Alaska, Point Roberts, Washington, Northwest Angle, Minnesota, and Campbell Island in Nova Scotia. So those 4. Now, if you drive to the Angle, you literally have to drive about 40 miles up that left-hand side of the map there in that yellow, this Manitoba. You drive about 40 miles through Canada, and then you re-enter into the United States up at the Northwest Angle. So you gotta have a passport if you're gonna go to the Angle. If you go to the rest of the Lake of the Woods area, the majority of it, you don't have to go through Canada at all. You just drive there just like you drive in any other part of Minnesota. One way to get around going through U.S. Customs, if you don't want to go through that, or you don't have a passport, or whatever the case might be, is that we have, you can snowmobile cross. We have broomstick snowmobile trails that are 42 miles across from the south end of the lake up to the Northwest Angle. Very nice trails. The other thing we have is we have a bombardier service right now called the Lake of the Woods Passenger Service. So you can just get a ticket, for a round-trip ticket, to jump on a bombardier. Bombardiers are those big trap rigs with the skis. And you jump in a bomber and they'll take you up, drop at your favorite resort. You fish for a few days, they'll pick you up and bring you back. In the summer, instead of bombers, they use charter boats. And they'll do the same thing, but bring you up there to avoid customs. Some stats. So, you know, with Lake of the Woods, you know, really, there's 317,000 acres of water in Minnesota, as you can see. I mentioned how many islands we have. Over 65,000 miles of shoreline. Can you imagine? You couldn't fish it all in a lifetime. So when you think about 65,000 miles of shoreline, think about all the islands. Think about the rock to sand transition, the saddles, the underwater points. There's so much structure, it just blows your mind. It's never ending. And I mentioned we have a number of lodging facilities up in our area. We do have the best catch rate of walleyes in the region, but you know, they estimate, you know, Lake of the Woods they call the walleye capital of the world, certainly with all due respect to a lot of other good fisheries. And we do have, they estimate 10 million walleyes. Not only that, we have a bonus fish, a cousin of the walleye called the sauger. I'll tell you, if you've ever been sitting in a fish house in February in Lake of the Woods out in that basin, and you don't got a school of walleyes under you, you're darn happy, at least you got a few saugers. Because they'll fill the tail up and they'll put some fish in your fry pan that night. And it gives you some activity as well. All right. So our walleye seasons. You know, our walleye season is an extended season up at Lake of the Woods. So we're border water with Canada. So, you know, the rest of the state of Minnesota typically has their walleye and pike season through February. Up at Lake of the Woods, our walleye and sauger season goes through April 14th, an extended season. We also, by the way, too, for any ice anglers out there, fish houses are allowed overnight on the ice through March 31st, whereas the rest of the state is February. So we get a whole nother month of ice fishing. Our fishing opener, as you guys know, is mid-May in Minnesota. We have a slot limit on our lake. All walleyes, 19.5 to 28 must be released. So you keep your eaters under 19.5, which are the best eating fish anyway, and you let all the 19.5 to 28s go, and then if you catch one over 28, you can release it if you want, but if you want to keep that one for the wall or whatever the case might be, you're welcome to do so. You know, keeping those 19.5 to 28-inch fish, that's the sustainability of our fishery. That's our future. And you know darn well that, you know, if people catch a 25-inch walleye, in many cases that walleye will be going into a cooler. The fact is, you have to let that fish go. That fish is going to go back and it's going to keep reproducing and reproducing, and that adds sustainability to our fishery. It sure is nice to have that confidence here. It's also nice too when you come up to Lake of the Woods. There's a real good chance that you're going to catch some nice walleyes, and you get a nice picture with them and you let them go back. But that gives the opportunity to somebody else. So our limit of walleyes is a combined limit of 6 walleyes and saugers. Up to 4 of the 6 can be walleyes. And I mentioned that you can keep one fish over 28. Our spring fishing on 4 Mile Bay, so the Rainy River and 4 Mile Bay, which is at the mouth of the Rainy River before it enters Lake of the Woods, that whole fishery, starting in March, you can still fish, but it's catch and release only. Of course, that's because some of those walleyes are going to start coming up the bay and coming up the river to spawn. So our spring fishing on the Rainy River is catch and release only. All right, numbers of walleyes look real good right now. We also have a lot of trophy walleyes in our lake, and the number of trophy walleyes is also very, very strong right now. People ask, why is it the walleye capital of the world, and why do you have so many big walleyes we hear about? Well, for the trophy walleye fishery, a few things you need. You know, one of them is you need the right gene. You know, there's lakes that I fish tournaments in that if I catch a big walleye in that lake, it'll be a 27-inch walleye. They just don't get real big. The gene pool isn't there. On Lake of the Woods, thankfully, we have a very big fish gene pool. It's not uncommon to catch 30, 31, 32-inch walleyes. They get bigger, but I mean, 32, when you get 32, that's a pretty darn big walleye. You know, we got big water, and that's super helpful. You know, whenever you hear of a lake that has a walleye problem, many times they have a forage problem, right? And you know, one of the great things, in fact, we were talking about it earlier, one of the great things of the Lake of the Woods is we have such an abundance of forage. I mean, think about it. Perch minnows, emerald shiners is a main forage for walleyes in Lake of the Woods. You know, there is crayfish, there is bloodworms, I mean, I can go on and on. There's so much food. The nice thing about having such a variety is that if tulies is a big forage, fish for Lake of the Woods walleyes. So what happens is, if you have a tough year with emerald shiners, for instance, it's not game over for the walleyes. There's so many other things that can fill that slot for the walleyes that they'll just gravitate to, and that's one of the reasons our fishery stays so sustainable. You know, when we talk about big walleyes, a DNR biologist told me once, he said, you know what? When you look at our best lakes in Minnesota, and you take a look at a trophy walleye lake and a trophy pike lake, real good chance there's a good population of tulies in that lake as well. I can tell you that in 10 years, a walleye on Lake of the Woods will get to be about 25 inches, or about 5 pounds. Right about that time, when they're 25 inches, I'm told from the DNR biologist that they really start focusing their diet on tulies. So it's no surprise that a lot of the big walleyes we catch will be out in that big basin. Certainly they're up in the islands too, but there's a lot of big fish out in that basin. That's because they're targeting those tulies. Those tulies are real high protein forage fish, and they help those walleyes grow big and get mass on them very quickly. It's amazing. I mean, there'll be times where if you're out on Lake of the Woods in the summertime And it doesn't happen a lot, but every once in a while you'll be out there and be just calm, you know. And all of a sudden you'll trolling or whatever you're doing, and all of a sudden you see tulies flying out of the water. You know what's going on below. Those big walleyes are chasing them up. I was fishing a championship tournament up there once for the Minnesota Tournament Trail, and I talked to some buddies of mine who won it. And they said, you know, we knew there was big fish down there. We could not get those fish to go. We could see them. We could see on our graphs, we could see hook, 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 massive. And we were going after them, pulling cranks. We just couldn't get them to go. And the second day, all of a sudden, we started seeing the walleyes started rising off the bottom. And all of a sudden, we saw tulies flying out of the water. We took our great big crankbaits on lead core, and instead of having them down in 32 feet of water where the bottom was, right by the bottom, we cranked them up about halfway in the water column, and we just lit it up. We got 4 fish over, you know, between 20 and 31 inches. That won the tournament for them because they had their eater fish already. So that's kind of cool about the ecosystem. And you'll catch tulies ice fishing. You know, the tulies are like they're not a whitefish. People mistake them. A tulie is like a Cisco. They're real oily fish. You wouldn't probably clean them and fry them, but people smoke them, and they really like them. You know what? We talked about our forage bays. You know, 65,000 miles of shoreline. So people talk about the walleye run on the Rainy River in the spring. And they do run. A large population of walleyes run up the Rainy River. And they spot up there. But not every walleye in the lake is going to go up the Rainy River. A good portion do that are in that general area. But the majority of the walleyes with 65,000 miles of shoreline, they're going to spawn on rubble all around the lake, right? In fact, they're going to have walleyes spawning at different times of the year. You can be catching walleyes that are on their beds, you know, up at the Rainy River. They're catch and release only. And heck, those walleyes up north, they might be under ice yet. They are under ice yet. And they're, you know, spawning is a long way from their thought process. So because of all that diversity, that makes it nice, because if you put all your eggs in one basket, if all the walleyes in the lake spawn on the Rainy River, and they laid their eggs and they got fertilized, and all of a sudden we got a cold blast of water, that would kill all those eggs, wouldn't it? Thankfully, if that would ever happen, we got thousands of other spawning areas to kind of mix it up, so we're going to have some fish each year. And of course, we don't have any commercial netting on the U.S. side. They do have a little bit of native netting on the Canadian side, but on the U.S. side, we don't have any commercial netting. A joint effort between the Minnesota DNR and I believe the state of Minnesota bought out all the commercial netters a number of years ago, and we don't have that anymore. And of course, our slot limit. You know, our slot limit really keeps that good gene pool in the system. The DNR told me that if you ever been on a panfish lake that's stunted, where you can't catch any big panfish there, and oftentimes the reason for that in many cases is because over harvesting pulled all the real big, let's say, sunfish out of there, those big bulls. And if you keep pulling that same size fish out of there and don't hesitate and don't hold back, pretty soon you might pull that gene out of there. So the biggest fish you're going to catch is going to be a medium-sized panfish. Well, the same thing can happen with walleyes. Thankfully, you know, with that slot limit, that's not going to happen to us. And of course, stained water. You know, so what is stained water? Stained water is kind of where you have, you know, instead of question. Our slot limit is 19.5 to 28 inches. 19.5 to 20 you must release. And the reason it's 19.5 is because that's when a female walleye in Lake of the Woods becomes, you know, mature enough to lay eggs. So that's why they started at 19.5 inches. But the stained water is kind of like that coffee-colored water. So, you know, right now, ice fishing, you know, if you have gin clear water, if you're going to go walleye fishing, your best bite's going to be the golden hours, the first hour of the morning, the last hour of the daylight, and maybe even at dark, when it's dark out. Well, in Lake of the Woods, because our water's got kind of that dark tint to it, what happens is the tannins from the bogs that feed Lake of the Woods, they stay in the water with the natural tannins. The water's clean, it's just stained. That actually makes fishing during the day for walleyes and saugers very good. Now, the whole thing there is that a walleye is going to expend as little amount of energy as possible to eat, to chase its prey. It's not going to chase minnows in clear water necessarily. It doesn't want to use up that energy. So what a walleye will do in clear water is it'll wait until it's dark out or some kind of ambush opportunity where it can see, but maybe the small perch is feeding on can't. It'll ambush them, right? Well, on Lake of the Woods is so dark down there that they have an inherent advantage even during the day, hence they feed during the day. And of course, we have a strong fishery topaz here too. So ice fishing, I'm going to touch on that first. Right now as we speak, so I'll give you an example of how big ice fishing is at Lake of the Woods. We have about 4,000 people in Lake of the Woods County that live in Lake of the Woods County. On a given busy weekend, on our ice, we'll have 10,000 people. 2.5 times the number of people on our ice that live in the whole county. Think about that. We get 2.5 million angling hours each winter. Now, part of the angling hours comes from the wheelhouses and people sleeping out there, and they're out there 24 hours a day, right, for days upon end. But nonetheless, that's a lot of fishing pressure. Thankfully, we have a big body of water that can handle it. When you think about 35 miles long by 25 miles wide, it's pretty big water. We have a number of ice roads that go out, and I think our longest ice road currently is up 24 miles. Can you imagine following a 24-mile ice road? It takes you over an hour to get out to the end of it. So it's a long ice road. And ice fishing up Lake of the Woods is paradise. And there's a picture of a big Mike next to a big bomber, but I thought it was kind of fun to see that Paradise Express. I just saw that one of the Lake of the Woods passenger service that runs people back and forth to the angle. I just got a Snapchat that they got a new one going on ice. And you know what the theme of that one is? Bush light. It's a whole bush light bomber, and you know what the theme is? Support our farmers. Pretty cool, right? All right. And ice fishing. Well, you know what? This is I can't show ice fishing on Lake of the Woods without showing the Igloo Bar. So this is an Igloo Bar. It's out a couple miles on Lake of the Woods out of Zippel Bay Resort. This bar on the ice is 1,000 square feet. It's got 2 big screen TVs. It's got an ATM machine in it, partial hot menu, and you can actually fish in the bar. They can fish in the bar. How many bartenders you know that have a live bucket of minnows behind the bar at all times? So Jenny, the main bartender, they start at noon. They're closed Mondays. Don't go Monday. But they start at noon and they go until 10 o'clock at night. And they're right at noon when she comes in. First thing she does, she puts a big sucker minnow down. They got that Zippel Bay Reef. And last week alone, she caught, now get this is last week alone, she caught a 38-inch pike, a 38-inch pike, a 42-inch pike, and over a 28-inch walleye. Well, 40-inch pike is about 20 pounds. 28-inch walleye is about 8 pounds. So, I mean, that's right out of the Igloo Bar. So they put it right on Zippel Reef, so it's on kind of a good spot too, But I asked the owner, Nick Panovich, I said, Nick, I'll tell you what, when somebody catches a walleye in here, it gets pretty festive. He says, you should see what happens when somebody loses one. That was kind of funny. And then the other thing I think is kind of cute is they have porta potties that they're kind of spray foam, so they look like little igloos also. And I thought it was kind of cute because they got them heated. And I said, Nick, how come you heat the porta potties? I mean, you don't heat porta potties on the ice, right? He heats them. I'll tell you what happened. He said, some of the gals were giving me a hard time because those toilet seats were so darn cold. Well, then once I started heating the gals, then all the guys started using the gals. Now I got to heat them both. So they got to heat the porta potties when you go to the Igloo Bar. It is real festive, and of course, nobody can believe, bar on the ice. Look at this. I can watch a hockey game, I can fish and have a beer. This is paradise, People are really excited about it. So now since then, another resort, Cyrus Resort, came out with their version of an ice bar. They just put it out last year for the first year. That one's called the Angry Walleye. That's a fun one too. So, we normally get fish houses out usually about December 10th, give or take, based on Mother Nature. But December 10th is normally when day houses get out that you can go ice fishing. I mentioned we could have them out through March 31st, and our season goes through April 14th. I thought it'd be kind of fun just to show you, a big walleye. Now this is a big 10-inch hole, but a buddy of mine shot me this video last year, and I tell you, there's nothing like looking through that ice and seeing big marble eyes, a white tip, a little bit of gold, ripping your drag out. I tell you, if that doesn't get your heart pumping, you need to get checked. Let's check it out. Oh, sorry. That doesn't help, does it? How's that? Better? That was just a tad over 28. It doesn't look like it's a big hole, but it was a nice walleye. So as the season progresses, as we start getting towards the end of the ice fishing season, now we're going to talk about pike. And I'll tell you what, why do people fish pike so adamantly as the ice starts going out? I'll tell you the reason why. Pike don't school, right? But you know what? They get congregated when it's pre-spawn. So what they're going to do is these fish are going to start getting out in front of their spawning areas, and they're going to just get congregated naturally because they're going to go to the same areas. Well, you can put out a tip up, and they've been catching pike all winter long. A lot of people learn that, hey, these big pike, they feed all winter long. They don't stop feeding, so you can fish them all the time. It's just that March, they get congregated. A lot of times what you use them as a tip up. You can use 2 lines on Lake of the Woods ice fishing. So a lot of times when they use as a tip up with a quick strike rig, quick strike rig is that leader material that comes down and wides off with a treble hook and a spinner on each side. And you'll hook one spinner behind the tail of the minnow, and you put another one right behind the head so that bait will hold horizontally. And usually you use them either big sucker minnows or a dead bait like a dead Cisco or a dead herring or something like that. Heck, some people even use hot dogs on occasion. You've probably heard of that for pike. The cheapest hot dog you can get, the best. But the real stinky ones with a lot of fat in them. But you put those babies, sometimes you lay your bait down in the mud and they'll pick it up off the mud. Sometimes you put it a couple feet off. Sometimes you hang it right below the ice. You experiment with your different tip-up sets to figure out what those pike are doing today. And I'll tell you what, to go out there and catch some pike that are anywhere from that 30 to 45 inches is not uncommon at all. We have a very trophy pike fishery. In fact, our slot limit for pike, our limit of pike is 3. You keep 3 per day. The slot limit on pike is 30 to 40 inches. You have to let them go. You can keep 1 per day over 40 for the wall, or for whatever you want to do with it. But a 40-inch pike is a 20-pound pike, and we have a lot of them in Lake of the Woods. I'll give you an example of how many pike we have in Lake of the Woods, big pike. I had a resort owner recently say, Joe Henry, so help me solve this one. What are we going to do with all these big pike in the lake? I'm like, well, what do you mean? We got too many big pike. They're eating our walleyes. We got to get rid of some of these big pike. You got to do something to promote these big pike and have people come up and keep them. We need to get them out of the lake. Of course, what a problem to have, right? I mean, I don't think there's that many that are eating the walleyes. But I was up with Larry Smith this last summer, and part of the TV show we went pike fishing, and I got a pike that we caught. It's on film, whatever. But I mean, I didn't measure it because we wanted to get that fish back so quick. But I promise you that fish was all 45, if not bigger, 45 inches. It's a big pike, So a lot of big pike in Lake of the Woods. Spring walleye. So what's going to happen is we're going to have late ice, and we're going to have some people that are tip-up fishing for pike. At the same time, we're going to have some people that are getting all ready to roll for the Rainy River. What happens is that Rainy River, you get a lot of big walleyes out in that big basin, and they can all get scrunched up in that Rainy River, and you can fish it. Imagine that. And these fish are hungry. They're in there in that ice cold water. Now, people get a little bit wild. And I say wild, I don't know if I'd be pushing my boat over this river ice to access that open water. But it's amazing. Every spring, a lot of people do it. And I hate to say it, oftentimes they're rewarded nicely with big fish and a lot of big fish. So it's really something else to see. Why do people fish the Rainy River for the spring? You know what? For some it's tradition. For others it's the first time they can splash their boat for the year. For others it's the only game in town. The only place you can open water fish walleye is really in the area, in many cases. So that usually happens in the mid-March, end of March through April 14th. The Rainy River opens. The Rainy River comes out of a rainy lake in I Falls. And the Rainy River flows 60 miles straight west. And then it turns north at the town of Baudette, turns north 12 more miles and feeds Lake of the Woods. So what happens is that river right now is all frozen. And what's going to happen is, once it starts melting, we're going to trap that open water. And people are going to be watching our Facebook page. They're going to be watching our website. They're going to be listening to the radio news I do. And they're going to we post every day, where's that open water line? Where's that open water line? And what they're waiting for is for that open water line to get to a certain point where they can start pushing boats over the ice. Then eventually, that open water line will hit the first major boat access, where they can start getting in, your 20-foot boats and whatever else. But and then you get out there, and initially there's going to be a lot of boats out there in one area, because everything else is iced up. Then, of course, as things start opening up, you get more areas spread out, and of course, it makes it a little bit nicer, I think, that you're not so on top of each other. But I'll tell you, the number of big walleyes you can catch in that spring season is just phenomenal. Catch and release, but I'll tell you what, can you imagine catching, if you hit it right, can you imagine catching 10 fish today over 28 inches? Imagine that. Just incredible. Most use a jig and a minnow when they're spring fishing like that. Using a jig and a big plastic, like there's so many different brands, I'll say, but the ribbed plastics with a curly tail or a paddle tail. And the bigger plastics, you put on a bigger jig in that current, and you can pitch shorelines if you want to, but the other thing you can do is you can be anchored up, or just slip real slow against the current, and have that big jig with that plastic and drop that baby back, and let it go back and thump that bottom. Pull it forward in that current, thump the bottom. Pull it forward, drop it back, it stops premature, set that up. It's amazing. That thump, when it stops like that, that big jig, you pull those walleyes in and they'll have that big jig way in their mouth with that big plastic on it. Isn't it really cool? The angle is where, you can anchor up and just jig. But I'll tell you what, going real slow upstream with it. I put my trolling motor down, and sometimes I even have my kicker motor going if there's a lot of current, just to give me a little propulsion. And I just go real slow and we use a bigger jig. We might use a 1/2 ounce, 3/4 ounce, maybe even an ounce if it's really a lot of current. The fish in that stained water, they don't care if you got a 1 ounce jig. They really don't care about that. What they care about is the presentation, how they're getting presented that lure or that bait. And of course, trolling is actually very effective. So trolling crankbaits. If I'm not finding fish, if I'm not doing real well, what I'll do is I'll put a crankbait on and I'll go troll upstream with a crankbait real slow, and I'll catch a lot of fish. Now you can pull a crankbait along shore, because let's say a shad rap. If a shad rap goes down 8 to 10 feet of water, let's say, you can pull along shore and work that shad rap real effectively. But what happens if you don't know where those fish are and you want to slide up into 6 and you want to slide down into 20 and you want to zigzag to figure out what those walleyes are doing and where they're at? I'll tell you what I've learned is that using a 3-way rig is so effective. If you haven't used one, all a 3-way rig is having a 3-way swivel where you got one line going to your rod and reel. You got the bottom one going about 2 feet down, or 1.5 to 2 feet down to about a 2 or 3 ounce weight. And then you got a 6-foot piece of mono or fluorocarbon with a shell with that crankbait. And the reason that is so effective is that you can troll against that current, and you can drop that down and just touch the bottom and just maintain contact with that bottom. But if we're in 6 feet of water, it's working. If we're going to drop off and go down to that 22-foot hole on our graph, we can slide down a little more line on and be touching the bottom and go through that 22-foot hole. And our crank's working against that current the whole time. And then we're going to slide back up. But no matter what, our crank's in that strike zone. Does that make sense? I'm explaining okay? But that 3-way rig is so effective. We did it this last spring, and we went from struggling, jigging, just struggling, catching a fish here, a fish there, and really a long time between bites, to just whacking the heck out of them, pulling those 3-way rigs. All right, and of course, it's all catch release on the river. I talked about the river opening from the east, and it's just amazing. People get so excited, We talked about jigging. Emerald shiners are always good on the Rainy River. The emerald shiner is a main forage of the walleyes, but those plastics are good, and of course our crankbaits. You can see that middle picture of a big jig and a big plastic in its mouth. Just inhale that thing. A lot of big walleyes and a lot of them. There's a picture of Brian Brosdahl, who was fishing up there a couple years back, taking a picture of one of his colleagues with Northland with a nice walleye. Those guys, they found a spot. Boy, did they get them that day. big ones too. I mean, it was one of those days that they'll never forget. And of course, sturgeon. You know, the Rainy River is loaded with sturgeon. So, you know, you think about a sturgeon, you guys. If you've never sturgeon fished, it's probably going to be the largest freshwater fish you'd ever catch. We get sturgeon, I mean, a 40, 50, 60-inch sturgeon is pretty par for the course. You know, some of the sturgeon you catch over 100 pounds. That's a big sturgeon. You're going to catch a lot of fish that are going to be around that 35 to 50 pounds. That's a big fish, and boy, do they fight. So you can fish sturgeon a good part of the spring, and actually, you know, most of the time you can fish them all year long. There's a catch and release season, there's a keep season, there's one little section of season that's closed, and that goes from about May 16th to July 1st is when the season's closed. It's spawning. Other than that, you can go out and catch sturgeon. And you know what? How do you fish sturgeon? You might say, I've never done it. I wouldn't want to do it. I don't know how to do it. It's not that difficult. Here's what you do, you guys. When you take a look at your navionics on your phone, or look at your maps on your GPSs with your chip setting, your Lake Master navionics, you're going to see the Rainy River is very well graphed out, and you're going to see the deeper holes in the river. Really, as a general rule, you're going to fish in those deeper holes for those sturgeon. And what you use is called a sturgeon rig. You're going to use a flat, no-roll sinker and a sturgeon rig. All a sturgeon rig is, you can buy them up north. A sturgeon rig is an 18-inch leader material, 60-pound test. It's teamed up with about a 4/0 circle hook. You take that circle hook, you load that up with 2 or 3 night crawlers, a big glob, or you load it up with a night crawler and a couple of frozen shiners broken in half. And you want to put a bunch of gulp and a bunch of bulk and scent on there. Then what you do is just real carefully just pitch that out, let it sink to the bottom, tighten your lineup, just like you're fishing carp or suckers. And then you tighten the lineup and just put that and just hang back and enjoy life. And you watch that rod tip. And I tell you, you think a big fish like that's going to take that thing and just go? You know what they do? Just like a sucker, like almost like a sunfish. Dip, 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 dip. That's how the big ones get it too. Just amazing. I think that must be their lips and sucking it in with their lips on the bottom, you know. But and then what you do with those circle hooks is, circle hooks, it's a conservation-minded hook. So what happens is if that fish takes it down and they gull a little bit, when you set the hook on a circle hook, that hook slides out and usually hooks in the lips. That's why it's a real conservation-minded hook. You don't, when you set the hook on a circle hook, you don't set the hook like you do, what you do is you just reel down, make it real tight, and that'll slide out, hook them in the lips. Really easy way to fish, but very effective, very effective. You know what, if you go sturgeon fishing in the spring of a lake of the woods, you're going to catch sturgeon. It's just a matter of how many and how big, but you're going to find some sturgeon. They fish them right in front of all the most popular resorts. Right out the mouth of the Rainy River, you'll see boats stacked on top of each other, and they're catching. Okay, I thought I'd show you a quick video. Now this video I'm going to show you, this was a Midwest Outdoors TV show, and we were actually fishing walleyes. But what happens in Lake of the Woods is a lot of times when you fish walleyes, you never know what you're going to catch. Let me just show it to you. It's
big fish. Big fish. Big, good arm. Yeah, I'm with sturgeon. Oh, sturgeon. Yeah. It's a big one. I don't think he's going to fit in the net. Gonna be a bigger boat. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, he sure does.
That was a kind of a neat little fight. I'll tell you what, I had everything I could do to grab that tail, to grab that body and try to pull that fish in. I couldn't get it. All that weight was hanging over the side, and I'm like, Greg, I can't get him. Get in there and help me. So he went in there to help me to pull that fish up, and then of course, as you saw, we finally got it. But you wouldn't believe how many big sturgeon like that are caught through the ice on Lake of the Woods. I mean, there's a lot. By walleye anglers, they're not always fishing for them. We've had more and more people fishing sturgeon through the ice on the Rainy River. So right now we have some primarily fishing guides. They work during the day and they go and get real tired at night by fishing at night. They'll set up a pop out on the Rainy River, pop up like that out in the Rainy River, and they'll stay out there into the night, and they've been getting some 60+ inch sturgeon. But it's kind of funny because when you look at their eyes in the pictures, you can tell they're pretty tired. But you know, they got the bug, right? They got the bug to catch. And what they do is when they put a hole in for sturgeon, they put 3 holes right next to each other so they get real big. And of course, their ice fishing rods they're using are like pool cues. You know, they're pretty stout. Okay, let's talk about some jigging tips. So, you know, we're talking about open water. You know, so now we're sliding into May and June, and in May and June on Lake of the Woods, the water's still pretty cold. And really, the most common technique you're going to use for fishing walleyes is going to be jigging. Now that'll be both on the Rainy River as well as out on the main lake and up in the northwest angle. Now, as a rule, you know, with that stained water, the colors, gold, your glow colors, and your brighter colors like your chartreuses and oranges, as a rule, are pretty darn good. Tell you, there's one jig I really do like. It's got a gold base. It's gold with a strip of glow white and pink. Tell you, that jig is money. Otherwise, you know, like gold with a half gold, half orange, or half gold, half chartreuse. You know, you experiment, right? But those brighter colors like that are really the best colors, I think. And then, you know, the other thing I'll mention to you too is when you hook a minnow, you know, you can hook a minnow, and if I'm in gin clear water, hook up that minnow just under the lips, and all that's very important. When you're fishing the stained water, like on Lake of the Woods and the Rainy River, you don't have to be so delicate. Those fish will still hit it. So consequently, what I do is I'll take that minnow and I'll hook the minnow through the mouth and put that jig hook out the gill. I'll push that minnow all the way up to the jig, and I'll take that point of the jig hook and push it through the middle of the minnow. Now, if that fish hits me halfway back on that minnow, I can still set that hook and get that walleye. And it doesn't hurt my ability to get bit one iota in that stained water. Okay? So just a couple of things. You know, when we fished out on the main basin on Lake of the Woods, you know, I would normally move around a little bit when I jig. For whatever reason on Lake of the Woods, you get out in that big basin, and that big basin, there's some structure, but it's flat mud for a long, long ways. Normally you're fishing that flat mud like we talked about. You get out there and you simply anchor up, and you jig over the side of the boat with that minnow. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll thump that bottom of that jig, you know, we'll let it fall to the bottom and hitting that bottom of the lake is like a dinner bell. It causes that vibration. And for the walleyes, they're so notorious in the mud for feeding out of the mud, whether it's bloodworms or minnows or whatever the case might be. You drop that thing down, that's like dinner bell. That vibration pulls those walleyes in, whether it's out of curiosity or just a natural feeding tendency. And oftentimes that'll help you catch more fish. You know, when we fish in the charter boats, it's funny. We'll get out there and fish, and we notice that about a half hour after we're fishing, that fishing actually gets better. I think what happens is we almost create a little bit of an ecosystem under our boat. You know, you anchor up, you got 6 customers jigging with frozen emerald shiners, let's say. You know, the smell of the minnows are around, the scales are starting to float around. You set the hook and miss a couple. You know, the minnows are falling off and dropping to the bottom of the lake. You're fighting a couple of fish that you're catching. That activity is it's drawing more fish in. It's almost like we create an ecosystem. So when we anchor up, it often gets a little bit better after we've been there a little while. Some jigging tips. You know, we talked about weight, stinger hook. If you're getting fish that are missing your bait and they're real finicky, a lot of times I'll put on just a stinger hook. If you don't know, it's just a little piece of, let's say about an 1.5 or 2 inches of monofilament or fluorocarbon line with a little treble hook. And you can put that on your jig, so you can take that little treble hook and hook it in the tail of the minnow. That way, if they're just nipping the tail of that minnow, you can still get a good hook set in and get that hook in their mouth. We talked about using the emerald shiners. Sometimes in the fall, they're alive. Right now, one of the resorts keeps them in the Rainy River all winter long, so they have live shiners. Otherwise, shiners die real easy. But otherwise, the bait stores will freeze them, and you can buy frozen shiners year-round, and they actually work very well. Jigging techniques, as a rule, I talk about dropping it in the mud, but also just kind of hold it in the strike zone. And what I'll do is when I'm jigging, a walleye will sometimes come up and when they come behind a jig and they open their mouth and flare their gills, you'll feel that tap, right? That's traditional. But there's many, many times when you're fishing walleyes that they'll mouth you and let go of it, and you hardly feel them. So naturally what I do is when I'm jigging, I'll jig it, drop it in the bottom, shake it once in a while. Sometimes I swim it up like you're ice fishing, you can make them chase. They'll come up and whack it instinctively. So I'll raise it up once in a while. I do whatever, I try different things. But a lot of times what will happen is if you can even just snap that jig, just cause a little bit of vibration, I'll even take it, I'll tap my line. If I'm using fire line or a no stretch, I'll tap my line and just use my finger and just tap my line. Just that little bit of vibration down there will get those fish to react. When I'm jigging, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just lift up real slow. Just lift up real slow. It's not a technique to get them fish. What I'm doing is I'm seeing if there's any weight on there. If I lift up just real slow and it feels like there's any extra weight, I'm going to set that hook. And it amazes me how many times there can be just a little bit of extra weight, and that's a really big walleye hanging on there. I ask myself, how many times do people miss those fish, didn't even know they had one, because they're not dialed in like that, right? All right, and of course we talked about colors. All right, charter boats on Lake of the Woods are very popular. One thing about a charter boat is that it's big water, so if it gets windy, you can get some big waves. Those charter boats can handle it. One thing cool about going on a charter boat, and I am a charter boat captain, so I will take groups out occasionally when I have time. But as a customer, there's no worries. You don't have to worry about a darn thing. You can jump in your vehicle with family, friends, whomever. You don't have to pull a boat if you don't want to. You certainly can pull a boat up, and you will catch fish if you pull your own boat up. You just got to be safe. If it gets too windy, you got to know what your boat can handle or can't. You go on a charter boat, you drive up, you go to a resort. You stay at a nice resort, you wake up, have breakfast. At 10 to 8 in the morning, you walk down to the dock, you're in charter boat number 2. The guide greets you, you step on board, rods, reel, tackle, bait, licensed charter captain who knows the weather, knows where the fish are, and he's networked with other captains on the water in real time. They're going to do everything they can to put you on walleyes. You fish walleyes, catch them all day. They bring you back in at 5 o'clock just in time for happy hour, and they even clean your fish for you. For a lot of people, it's pretty darn nice. At the same time, I do get it. I got my own boat too. Obviously, I fish pretty hardcore. There are times when I do like going out and just hunting them on my own. But when you're going on vacation, depending upon the group you have, charters can be a nice option. And really, you think about it, there's not a lot of places that you have charter boats for walleyes. Lake Erie, Lake of the Woods, I think out in Saginaw Bay a little bit, but there's not a lot of bodies of water that you do go out and charter fish for walleyes. Open water fishing for walleyes in July and August. So you know what? That jig bite's going to last usually. Last year, with that high water we have, for whatever reason, that jig bite lasted almost all the way through the summer. But traditionally, through June, and then in July and August is when you're going to start doing things like pulling spinners and pulling crankbaits. We have that big basin on Lake of the Woods, you guys, that great big open water that's 25 miles by, or 30 miles by 25 miles wide. That's a lot of water. And I'll tell you what's so cool is that a lot of times when you get into the deep summer, like the dog days of summer, people say, I don't want to fish walleyes then, fishing gets tough. Heck, I know people that set their vacations for July and August up at Lake of the Woods, and here's why, is that we know there's a very, very predictable pattern that there's going to be a lot of walleyes out in the middle of that basin. And when you're driving your boat along on that basin, you're looking at your graph, sometimes it looks like simulation mode at your favorite retailer, where you're going to see cloud of bait, cloud of bait, cloud of bait, and you're going to see hook, 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 hook. Those hooks are walleyes. And you're going to see these fish all over the screen. And it's so cool trying to get dialed in with crankbaits to catch these fish. Sometimes, how do you get your lures down in 30 or 35 feet of water? Well, you know what? Certainly, lead core line can do it. You can put on you want to make it inexpensive and easy? I'll tell you what a lot of people do up there with some of the locals. Use a 4-ounce bottom bouncer with a 6-foot piece of fluorocarbon or monofilament. 4-ounce bouncer, You lower that down to the bottom of the lake. It's going to keep your lure down there. You got a 6-foot piece of line with a shallow diving crankbait. You're going to catch a ton of walleyes. Our charter boats use downriggers. If you have downriggers on your boat, they work really good on Lake of the Woods in the summer. And then, of course, snap weights is another technique to get your lures down there. But the bottom line is getting those crankbaits down to where the walleyes are, and then get them dialed in. Do they want a stick bait? Do they want a shad style? Do they want rattles? Do they want no rattles? Do they want to hit in the bottom once in a while? Do they want to hit them right in the head? Do they want it 3 feet above them? So instinctively it makes them chase up. That's what you need to figure out when you're trolling. That's the game, right? It's not like every day you can put a crankbait on and troll through these fish, and because there's hundreds of fish in your grass, you're going to catch them every day. You got to figure them out. What speed do they want? Do they want just a little bit, or do they want to go 3 miles an hour and just rip them through them? You know, again, getting the things dialed in. To me, that's part of the fun. But you will catch a lot of fish and a lot of big fish pulling crankbaits in the summer on Lake of the Woods. It's amazing. It's crazy. All right, so we talked about different ways to get down there. We call that area no man's land. Certainly, we do have some reefs on Lake of the Woods. So when you talk about there's reefs, there's so much mud. You have a reef that pops up. That's almost like a magnet. There's going to be fish hanging around that reef, whether they're on top, on the side, or into the mud basin. You know, we talked about different kind of crankbaits to experiment with. The one rule of thumb I'll say is this: if we're fishing together, let's do something different. I'm going to start out with a longer stick bait that has rattles. Why don't you start out with a shad style that doesn't have any rattles? I'm going to start out with gold, so I love gold on Lake of the Woods. Maybe you should start out with a more natural color. And let's work together and figure out what these fish want today. And then we'll adjust. Okay, we'll talk about size, colors. Let's slide over to crawler harnesses. Tell you what, for a while, I started fishing the professional walleye trail as an amateur with the intent of possibly going pro. And it was kind of an experimentation thing for me. You know, when I fish these different lakes around the United States for walleyes, it was amazing to me how many times these pros would use crawler harnesses in their techniques on those lakes or rivers. I couldn't believe it. Yes, did I use spinners when I fished? Yes, I did. I caught a lot of walleyes using them. But I didn't use them to this extent. Tell you what, as I started fishing at PWT a little bit, I started learning how effective crawler harnesses are for walleyes. And then I started getting dialed in on technique, both for guiding and also for tournament fishing. And it's by far probably my favorite technique of fishing because it's just so effective. So what I want to do today is I'm just going to take just a little bit here and just talk to you about a few different nuances to crawler harness fishing that's going to work not only on Lake of the Woods, but it's going to work on any body of water you fish. And then we'll close her up. So, you know what? First off, I'm going to show you my go-to harness. And as a rule, and you know, nothing's ever for sure, but as a rule, I'm going to use a 2-ounce bottom bouncer. I'll tell you why. Now, let me ask you a question. If I talk, can you hear me back there? Can you? Okay. I'll try to talk loud just for a moment. But you know what? What I'm going to do is, this is my setup. So in a nutshell, I'm going to use a 2-ounce bouncer. You might say 2 ounces is a lot of weight. Why 2 ounces? I'll tell you why. It's because I can fish effectively in 5 feet of water, but if I'm looking at my graph and I'm going to fish a little break looking for these walleyes, and it slides down to 15, 20, 25, 30 feet of water, I can use a 2-ounce bouncer and maintain contact with the bottom all the way down to 30 plus feet of water and slide back up a break if I need to. So it's versatile that way. You might think 2 ounces is a lot, but once you use it for a while, it's nothing. I start out with about a 5-foot snell is what I tie my harnesses for. Now I do tie my own harnesses, but I'll tell you, you don't have to tie your own. Nowadays, you can buy harnesses with fluorocarbon line, and they make them really nicely now. They make them with fluorocarbon line. They make them with a quick change clutch so that you can change your blade color on the fly. I use about a 15-pound fluorocarbon line. The reason I use 15-pound is I can get away with heavier line when I'm using fluorocarbon because it disappears in water. I don't think I'm hurting myself 1 iota. Yet if I can use a little bit heavier line, you know, if I'm catching a big walleye, maybe I caught 4 walleyes before that were flopped around in the net with that line. Maybe that walleye's tooth or a fin or something nicked that line. I want all the insurance I can have if I'm going to catch a big walleye. So I use fluorocarbon line. I like to use the different color bead patterns in a pattern of my spinner. This spinner here, I talked about a quick change clevis. That makes it so you can pop that spinner off and put a different color spinner on, or a different size spinner. Makes it real nice. In my boat, and I don't know how you guys do it, I like to carry my harnesses in something like this. This is how I store my harnesses. So what I do is I buy a container that will fit in my boat compartment. And then of course, inside here, I use those swimming noodles. Swimming noodles you buy for $1 or $2. I'll take and I'll cut those to size to fit my boat container. And then what I do is I just take and I'll take a fillet knife and I spin that fillet knife around about every inch or two to make some grooves in there so I can wrap my line. And I'll tell you, now I got a real handy way to store my harnesses. It's nice if it blows out of the boat, it floats. When I wrap my harnesses up, it's got a wider diameter. It's not so tight, but it's got a wider diameter, so it saves me time. And look at the harnesses I can store here. It makes it perfect. When I'm out fishing, I want to be efficient. So, I talked about the quick change clevises for blades. So I got many different colored blades, different size blades, whatever, but I store them in my boat usually, like this. So I can change on the fly. A lot of times when I'm at night, if I need to tie, I always have a clipper there. I got my number 2 and number 4 octopus hooks I use, and I got a whole bunch of different kind of beads, right? Quick change clevises. But I do this. This is a great time of year to be tying spinners and load up your harnesses for the summer. So it makes it nice. Now, here's a kicker. When we're trolling, when we're going to go spinner fishing, what we're going to do is I'll use a 1-hook harness if I'm going to use a minnow or a leech. I'll use a 2-hook harness when I'm pulling a crawler. Okay? So when I'm pulling a crawler, and I'll talk about that just for, that's kind of what we pull mainly in the summer, it seems. When I hook a 2-hook harness to a crawler, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that night crawler, I'm going to take the dark part of it, the head, the tough part, and I'm going to hook that with that front hook. Now I'm going to hook that crawler right in the very front. If I hook it too far back, what's going to happen is that crawler is going to spin on me. For this technique, I don't want it to spin. This isn't slow death or anything else. I want this to go through the water straight because it's going to undulate, and the blade's going to get it rolling. That's how I want it. So I'm going to hook that first hook right through the head. I'm going to straighten that crawler out, and I'm going to hook that second hook so that crawler is straight across that 2-hook spread. That normally ends up being in the band of the crawler, if you notice that band of the crawler. Now if I hook that crawler and there's a loop in there, I'm going to unhook that second hook and straighten that out again and hook it. Now when I hook that crawler, I might have this much crawler hanging out. They're big crawlers, right? I have a line hanging out. I don't need that. They'll hit it, but they're just going to miss my hooks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, I'm going to pinch that crawler off so I got about 2 inches hanging out, 2 to 3 inches hanging out that back hook, because that's all I need. You think about it. You have your bead pattern, which is a good sized bead pattern. You got your blade, and then you have your worms between the 2 hooks, and then you get a 2 to 3 inch tail. That's plenty of a profile for a walleye. So now what's going to happen is, when I'm drifting or trolling this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be going along, and here's the kick, you guys. I want to make sure that my presentation is at 45 degrees. I don't want to go way back behind the boat like a crankbait. I want this at 45 degrees, okay? And I'm going to lower this down. I'm going to touch bottom, and I'm going to keep it just off the bottom. I want to be able to touch bottom so I know I'm down there, but keep it just off. Touch. Just once in a while, I'll just drop my rod tip. I'm on the bottom. If I'm not, I'll let a little line out. Now, when I'm pulling spinners, can I use a spin cast rod and reel like this when I'm pulling spinners? You absolutely can. However, if I had a choice, and I'm not suggesting you go buy a new rod and reel, but I mean, if you have a bait caster, or if you're going to invest in one anyway, a new rod and reel, I would consider having a bait caster for pulling spinners. If I'm pulling a brake, and that brake is starting to slide down, every time I let line out with one of these, I have to flip that bail, right? It's just a little bit more of a hassle. I'll tell you what,
when I'm using a bait caster, I can be coming on a break, and I can let just a little bit of line down and just go like this. It's just so much easier doing that, right? In fact, if you get the right bait caster, you can get one with a flip and switch. A flip and switch is where you press this and it automatically deploys. In fact, I have kind of a little switch in here. I can do that with this. See that? So when I'm working, I might be watching. There might be other boats in the area. I'll be watching my graph or my GPS or my sonar. Maybe I'm running a kicker. I might have a lanyard around me running my trolling motor, right, steering against the wind or whatever, zigzagging boats or whatever I'm doing if I'm in a tournament. But whatever the case is, if I can have just one more thing to make life easy for me like this, it's nice. Okay? So I'm going to pull this at 45 degrees, and what's going to happen is when a walleye hits it, it's not going to hammer it like a crankbait. It's going to load up almost like a wet sock. So it's just going to start just like that. With that 2 to 3 inches of crawler hanging out that back hook, I don't have to give them any line or anything like that. What I'm going to do is when they load up like that, I'm going to go 1001, swing, and set that hook. I'm not going to jerk it. I'm just going to get a nice little swing. 9 times out of 10, they'll have that hook in their mouth. Real simple. So, man, crawlers are good. You can be using this presentation. You know, people say, what's the water temp when you start using a crawler harness? I never like to give rules of thumb because whenever I give a rule of thumb for walleye fishing, somebody breaks it, right? I like to say 50-degree water temp or higher. Now, I say 50-degree water temp for pulling spinners, and I hear somebody used this technique on the opening of Minnesota fishing when the water temp was probably in the low 40s, and they whacked it. So, but as a rule, summer fishing, you know. So, beads. You know, one of the cool things about beads on that harness is that you can match the beads to 2 different things. Number one, you can match the beads to the forage that you think the walleyes are eating. If it's a perch, maybe you're using green and orange alternating. Or maybe you're using some gold and green, you know what I mean? If it's emerald shiners, maybe you're using blue and silvers, you know, with the bead pattern. You can also do the same thing with your blades. You know, when I'm fishing early in the year, I'll use a smaller number 2 blade. When that goes through the water, it's like the small bait fish that are there in like May. You know, a small bait fish, when they go through the water, their vibration is very little because that little tail. That's that little blade. As the season goes on, I'll switch to number 4 Colorado normally. And if I'm fishing Lake of the Woods in a September tournament, going for 31 inches because I'm fishing a tournament, I'll put on a number 5, maybe in the number 6 blade. But that's going to be more like a thunk, 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 more like a tulip, right? So, but if you ask me my go-to blade size, as a rule in all bodies of water, I'd say a number 4 Colorado. It's just a very basic blade. Okay, why fish them? You know, walleyes love them. You can move around and cover a lot of water. We talked about going deep or shallow. You know, in weed beds, you can actually pull a crawler harness through weeds, pretty sparse weeds, and get them through there pretty darn nice. Of course, the color variations either match the hatch or match the color of the water you're in. If you're in very clear water, maybe you want to use the silvers and the blues and things like that. If you're in real stained water, you might want to use your oranges and your pinks and your golds for beads and spinners. And of course, they give excellent action. You know, a walleye has a lateral line, and that lateral line senses vibration. They also have an inner ear. And between those 2 things, a walleye normally senses its prey before it ever sees it. So those spinners going through the water, plus that scent, very deadly. We talked about the basics. You know, when do you use artificial worms? A fake worm instead of a live crawler. Personally, I'm going to go with a live crawler as much as I can. The 2 instances I'll use a fake artificial worm. Number 1, if I'm pulling through weeds. If I'm pulling through a lot of weeds and you get hung up once in a while and you got to jerk it out of a weed, that jerk will sometimes have that crawler pop off your hooks. Whereas if you have artificial worm on there, that'll stay glued on. The other time is when I'm on a body of water that has a whole bunch of bait fish. If I'm in a body of water that has a whole bunch of bait fish like perch, Lake Winnebagosh as an example, you can pull through thousands and thousands of perch, and it's literally, your worm's gone. You can't keep it on. They devour it. You put that artificial worm on, and you can feel them hitting it all day long, and eventually you're going to get your walleye. Okay, you know, if you're looking at speed, we talked about 45 degrees. That 1.25 miles per hour is really the speed I aim for. 1.25. And I'm going to play just a quick video that's going to put the technique kind of into motion on how you do it when you're pulling a spinner. Basically, when I pull a harness, what I'm doing, we're trying to maintain a 45-degree angle, and we're just going along here to about 1.1, 1.2. Typically, when I call like this, the rod's going to load up. It's not going to hit the zone really hard with that. Big fight is like a wet sock. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to hang on to this for a second or two, and then just get the pressure that I need. Just the 45-degree angle on that line is really, really key. And I can do this in 5 feet of water like we are right now, or 5.7 feet of water, or I can be doing this in 30 feet of water. That's one of the reasons I like these tool on the bottom ones here. It's very, very versatile. So you get the gist of it anyway. You know, again, you know, if you're fishing with somebody who's not such an avid angler and they're having a hard time hooking their walleyes, put the rod in the rod holder. A lot of times you'll see that rod load up and you just don't say anything. Just let that rod load up, the walleye will hook itself. It's crazy, but it works. This is I want to show you this final video. This is fishing with Larry Smith Outdoors out of Wisconsin. But you know, we were doing a show on Lake of the Woods this year, and we did a milk run. Was pulling spinners in the summer, and we went spot to spot until we connected with some real nice eaters. Finally, he said, "Hey, we already have a good show. We have all we need right now. Let's go try to catch a big walleye." So there was a couple of deep rock piles that I knew about from tournament fishing. I said, let's just go do a quick milk run for the rest of the day. We had another hour and a half left. Let's do a quick milk run on the deep rock piles and see if we can't get you a big-headed one. So we went up to this rock pile. It was 33, 34 feet of mud, and just a little bit of rock popped up to 32. And I went around it. I didn't want to spook any fish, even though we're in deep water. I didn't think I would, but I'm always playing the odds, right? So I didn't drive over that spot. I went upwind of it. It's always easier to troll with the wind and with the waves if you can. So I went upwind. I set up way above it. I turned down. I was far enough up so that we could get our bouncers down before we hit the A spot, the prime spot, right? I wanted to make sure that we're in the water and everything was ready to roll. I don't want to be fuddling around with something when we're on the A spot. So I went plenty far up. We came down. And I'll tell you what, as soon as we started touching those rocks, look what happened.
You're on fire, man. Oh, I'd like to hear that. Now there's just a little compound here. You got that look on your face. That's pretty good. Not that way. When you pull balls, you feel that weight. And you tighten it up and you hang on to it. It's like someone, don't be wrong. How much you feel that ever takes you? Pretty good. It's an awesome feeling.
So Larry, you're gonna see he's got a net with a hat in it. I'm like, Larry, let me get the hat out of there. No, leave it there. It's there on purpose. Why do you have a hat in your net? Oh, it's kind of fun. People ask about it. So when you see it, see that hat there? That's there for a reason, I guess. Larry thought it was just a nice fish, you know. Wait till you see this fish.
Yeah. Oh my God. Woo! Joe! Oh, buddy! It's a giant! Oh, dude, that is a big, big fish. Oh, take your time. Take your time. Oh my God! Oh, yeah! That's what it's all about right there! Lake of the Woods! Let's do it, baby. Oh, look at this giant! This is a giant. It's a giant. Joe! Yeah. Oh, it's an ancient fish. Oh. Whoa. I'm telling you, it doesn't get any better. Yeah, look at that fish. Look at what's giant. Look at the head on that fish. Oh, yes. Wow. That is just absolutely amazing, you know?
So I'll stop it at that, but that fish was just a tad over 31, and it was a solid 31, and I should have shown the park. People always ask, did you let that fish go? And yeah, we let it go healthy. Swam away, so it's still in Lake of the Woods, I think, but a couple of little tips for your spitter fish and your crawler harnesses. You know, use a small tail. You don't need that big snake. You don't need that whole crawler behind your second hook. Use a small piece of crawler, pinch it off. If I have really big crawlers and I can pinch that piece off and it's long enough to use again for the next set, I'll keep that piece. Otherwise, if it's just a little bit too short, I just throw it in the water. Give it action. So when you're pulling spinners, don't be afraid to, zip it up once in a while, drop it back, that sort of thing. Fishing tournaments, I learned this fishing tournaments. I'll give you a little tip. When you're fishing tournaments and you're pulling a spinner and you get tapped, and you know it wasn't a sunfish or a perch tap, you know it was a walleye tap. It's a good whack, right? You freaking whack it and you'll get something trailing you. What we learned is that if you take and just free fall your lure, so if you're pulling a spinner and you get tapped, just free fall it. Put it straight back. Let the thing free fall. When you pull it forward, about half the time you'll catch that fish. I don't know if they're hitting it because the thing's dropping, or they're watching it drop and all of a sudden shoots off and they jump on it, but you normally, half the time you'll catch that fish. Well, then I said to my partner, John, that's only when that walleye gives us a courtesy tap. What about all the walleyes that fall where our baits but never tap us like that? So now it just inherently, we'll start dropping back inherently and boom, pull forward. Fish. I guarantee you we're catching a lot of fish we wouldn't otherwise normally catch by doing that. When you're pulling through weeds, I sometimes use my spin cast and I use a little bullet weight. Cast that out over the weeds and just troll slowly through the weeds. You'll catch a lot of walleyes. If the fish are really, really finicky, don't be afraid to put a stinger hook on the back of your second hook and put that stinger hook so it fits just in the back of that worm. If they're biting real delicately, a lot of times you'll catch a lot of fish in your stinger hook. Leave your rod in the rod holder, gives it a different action. And of course, when you're drifting, don't be afraid that you can hold your rod, but when you hold your rod when you're drifting, or even when you're trolling, you're giving it one action. When you put your rod on the rod holder, that action of the boat gives it a different action, whether you know it or not. So maybe try both. All right, and of course, finally for Lake of the Woods, we're talking about fall fishing. Fall fishing is tremendous. Again, it goes back to a jig bite. You can also pull spinners. The Rainy River really lights up in the fall, and I thought I'd show you this last one here, and we'll close it up.
That's really good. Ready? Right now. Oh, jeez. Hey, bucket spread. No, I think that is what we call rainy river. That is what you call rainy river fall right there. This is a freaking tape. Let's put this on a stick and see what we have. Dig it up for you. Wow. Just about 30 right in there. Oh. Look at the size of that cut. Yes. That's 10 and a half, 11 all the way right there. That's like 10 and a half, 11 half fish. Oh, folks, you know what? Greg, you know what? Dallas was the best western to catch the monster walleyes, fishing the body of water. That has monster walleyes. Yep, I'm not about it. Big girl, that's for sure.
And there we are. So we covered a lot of territory, and I appreciate your patience, but there's a, what's that? Oh, my cord is blocking it?
No, you're hooking on your plug.
Oh, okay. There we go. How's that? So I'm not yanking my laptop off the table, you mean? Perfect. But we covered a lot of things today, and there's a lot of ways to fish Lake of the Woods. It's tremendously, it's a huge system. But if you've never been up, it's great. I'm not here to sell Lake of the Woods, but rather educate you on it in case you and your friends or your family would ever go up. If you ever have any questions about Lake of the Woods, I would be more than happy to talk to you over the phone. So you're welcome to get my contact information. Otherwise, if you grab a visitor guide, we have a bunch of Lake of the Woods visitor guides at the front door. Take one of those and get a hold of me through the tourism bureau. But I'll do anything I can to help you guys out. If you're going to come up and go with one of our resorts, if you're just going to pull your own boat, if you're going to go ice fishing, whatever the case might be, I'm very, very happy to help you out. Terry, do we have time for a couple of questions? Any questions, you guys? About Lake of the Woods? Yes, please. What year did they implement the slot? That's a really good question. I want to say that the commercial fishing ended, I want to say right around 1989. The slot limit was before my time. It was already implemented. So it would have been, I think, somewhere in that same proximity. And for a long time on Lake of the Woods, the limit of fish, even when I started fishing it, it was 6 walleyes and 8 saugers. There were 14 fish. And of course they've trimmed it down, which I think was probably good. But man, it used to be, you go in the fish clean shack and it was like, holy smokes, But yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't know exactly when they did that, but I do know why they did it. And also I can tell you this, on the Rainy River, they used to have, not that long ago, they had a 2-fish limit. And the 2 fish you could keep on the Rainy River in the spring were both under 19.5. The reason they got rid of that to make it a catch and release fishery only in the springtime is because when they were doing electroshocking, they noticed that the number of mature male walleyes was starting to drop. And of course the reason for that is because everybody that went fishing, even though they're after a 30-inch walleye, they're going to keep their 2 fish under 19.5 just because they're going to bring home some fillets if they can, right? So because they started seeing the mature male walleye population drop, they said, let's do catch and release. People aren't going to care. They're coming up for the tradition. They're after big fish anyway. And I think that was a good move. That happened probably 4 years ago, I think. Other questions? Yes, please. We're fishing north of Green Bay. Oh, with Larry Smith. So Larry Smith came over to Lake of the Woods, of course. He came to my neck of the woods. Yep. Yeah, so when I work with Larry Smith, what we're really doing is really promoting Lake of the Woods. So he comes over, and it was kind of funny fishing with Larry Smith. He has a brand new Warrior. So I'm like, are you lady ready to roll? He goes, what are you doing? I'm like, what do you mean? You're the guy, and you're the keys. So he gives me his brand new Warrior, and there's some logs out there and different things, and a little bit nerve-wracking, but Larry's a great guy, good character. We kind of a funny story about Larry Smith. We were working, we shot a show in the Rainy River this summer in August, just to show that fish are there all year long. And there was a Coast Guard boat out of the river, and that Coast Guard boat was kind of watching us, and I said, Larry, we're probably gonna get checked by the Coast Guard. Do you want your videographer to film that, or would you rather him not film it? Might as well ask you now than later. He goes, oh, no, I always like filming stuff like that, because that's real life, that happens, So the Coast Guard boat eventually pulls over and says, hey, Larry Smith, I'm from Wisconsin. I've watched you for years. You have a great show. Thanks a lot. And they pulled away. So I thought that was kind of fun. And then, of course, we're at the public access, and Larry's got his boat isn't all stickered up, but his truck is, his pickup truck. Larry Smith Outdoors and all this stuff, real great. And somebody says, hey, Larry, I've watched you for years. I just want to say you have a great show. And he goes, oh, hey, thanks a lot. Hey, hold on a second. He runs to his pickup truck. He grabs one of his big sponsors, his Mike's Country Meats. If you ever watch it. He's got a bunch of jerky. Here, have some jerky in case they get hungry in the boat. He said the same thing to the Coast Guard guys. Hey, can I give you guys some jerky, Mike's Country Meats jerky without getting in trouble? And then it must have been the commander stepped in and goes, I'm sorry, sir, we can't take anything like that, but thank you for the offer. Yes?
Question came with coffee this morning. You mentioned a 2-hook rig for northern bite fishing, and you mentioned a hook and a spinner. Why the spinner?
So the question is, I mentioned a 2-hook rig for northern pike fishing, which is a quick strike rig for ice fishing. And then I mentioned that, the wire comes down and wires off, and it's got a treble on each side with a spinner. And the question is, why the spinner? And I
I
think
know the answer.
I think you know the answer too. Why don't you say it?
It's a lure.
Yep.
And that's what a game warden told me. To make that two-hook rig legal in Minnesota, you have to put a spinner on it and make it look like a lure.
That's exactly what it is, yeah. So they put a couple little spinners, which for pike doesn't hurt you one bit anyway. It's a good attractor. But you know what's nice about those quick strike rigs is that, you know, rather than using one hook, if you use one hook, you got to let that pike take it for a while to make sure that hook's in them, and then you hook them deep. Well, that quick strike rig, when you've got a treble hook just in front of the tail and just behind that head, that bait holds horizontally, you can set that hook right away because they're going to have it, you know. Other questions? Well, Lake of the Woods, about pulling spinners. Do you guys pull out spinners around here? Yep. Is that how you do it? And then.
Oh, yeah. You're good still.
So, you know, and those are just some things that, you know, we all learn over time, right? But I always say, you know, if we can share the tips that we learn on the water, it's going to make us all better anglers. Yes?
Okay, I've been around really good fishermen, really good fishermen. The trick I use when I use a half crawler and I use the back half, I always hook the stroke off piece to the back because fish will come up and they can smell it.
So if you heard him, when he pinches off the crawler, the piece that he saves, he'll put the broken off piece towards the back of the harness because it gives more scent, basically. Good tip? Good tip? Yep. I think that's great. Say, I was going to say, I'll get to you next. I was going to say, people ask about artificial crawlers. They say, do you have a favorite? I do have a favorite. So, you know, I'm not endorsed by them, so I'll just tell you. There was a crawler that I started using in tournaments that I have so much confidence in, the state crawler. I have so much confidence in, I'll put it against a live crawler any day of the week. And you know what? They quit making it. What are the chances, right? Guess what? Another tackle company just bought them, back in production. It's the, you ever hear of that Uncle Josh company? Uncle Josh pork rind? So it's Uncle Josh, and the product is pork. They got pork night crawlers that are 7 inches long. And they're pork. They're made out of like a pig's hide. And the reason they quit making them was because the way they were bringing pigs to market was much quicker than they were in the past, so that byproduct of mature belly meat or belly fat wasn't available anymore. So they couldn't get it so cheap, right? So it just wasn't cost conducive. So then they sold to Acme Tackle Company, and Acme Tackle Company was very well aware of the strong following that lure the night crawlers had. So they reinstituted it now. Tell you what, you take a scissors, it's leather. You can't break them apart. You got to cut it with a scissors. So you got a 3.5 inch piece that's perfect for a 2-hook harness. You can go and catch 10 walleyes on it. And it's in this real slimy juice, man. It's like you put that juice in the water. It's like gasoline with a rainbow, but really slimy. And I'll tell you what, it just works. It works really well. You had a question?
So I was just curious how Minnesota regulations and Canadian regulations kind of matched up, and if that's something that people have to be aware of, or if it goes by residency, how that works.
Great question. How does the Minnesota and Canadian, how do the rules differ? And there are very different rules. In fact, you know, give an example. When you're in Minnesota, if you want to open a beer and have a beer in Minnesota waters, you can. You cannot do that in Canada waters. You can't have, you know, any open alcohol, you know, in Canada waters. The limit on the U.S. side is a combined limit of 6 walleyes and sockers, up to 4 canoe walleyes. When you go to the Ontario side of Lake of the Woods, the limit is 2 walleyes. And then based on whether you have a sport license or a conservation license will determine your possession limit. If you have a sport license, you can bring home 4. If you have a conservation license, you can bring home 2 walleyes on the Ontario side. And there's a little bit different slot limit too. You can keep 1 walleye on the Ontario side over 18.1 inches per day. On the U.S. side, of course, we have a different slot limit. So yeah, there are some different rules and regulations. You know, people ask, hey, when we go to the Northwest Angle, how does that work? I mean, you know, what if we want to go to the Northwest Angle and fish Ontario waters? Well, you know what? You're allowed now to boat from Minnesota waters into Ontario waters, and as long as you don't touch land, you don't have to check in with Canada Customs at all. So you can boat over into Ontario from the northwest angle. So one of the reasons some people like going from the northwest angle is there's such sparse population, that part of the lake doesn't get fished at all. So you can boat over from the northwest angle. When you're at a resort on Oak Island, you're looking at the next island right there, and it's Canada. I mean, that's how close Canada is when you're up there. So if you want to go fishing, Canada, there's 40 miles of islands going into Ontario. So when you go with a northwest angle guide, most of the time they're going to take you up amongst the islands in Ontario just to give you that experience. And then again, if you don't touch land when you go to Ontario, you don't need to check in with customs. Just need to have an Ontario fishing license, no big deal. And then you have a lesser limit, but the experience is second to none. It's incredible. Did you know this? I'll give you another good one. That the definition of water is different than the definition of ice. So if we wanted to go ice fishing, we can boat into Ontario waters, not touch land, and come back and not have to check in with any customs. Yet if we snowmobile into Ontario waters, now we have to check in with Canada Customs because the definition of ice equals land. So now we'd have to check in with Canada Customs to go ice fishing over there, and when we come back to the U.S., we'd have to check back in with U.S. Customs. So our resorts up in the northwest angle now all have iPads, so that if you have to, when you first go up there, for instance, you drove 40 miles through Canada, let's say, and then now you enter the angle, you just enter the U.S. You have to check in with U.S. Customs, right? So you can go to, instead of, like the old days, you'd have to go to a check-in station and call. Now you can go right to the resort, order your favorite beverage, and use an iPad and check in. It takes 5 minutes, no big deal. So they made it much easier. Yes?
You didn't mention anything about slow death books, and you talked about not wanting that. Collar harness, squirrel, the slow death hooks, squirrel.
Yeah, so the question is, I didn't mention any of those slow death, and I talked about not wanting that thing to twirl, slow death twirls. And so just a different presentation. Slow death is a deadly presentation. It's great. The purpose of slow death is using a small piece of worm and having that piece of worm swim or twirl. That's what you want with slow death. All I was saying is that when I'm pulling spinners, I don't want it twirling for spinners. I'd rather have it going straight. I've learned over a lot of hours that I just think it works better by having that just going straight through the water rather than spinning when it comes to a...
Do you like slow death hooks?
I do like slow death hooks, yep. But if I have a choice, depending upon what the bite's like, I think I can pull spinners a little bit quicker and cover more water with them. So if I have a choice, I'll go with spinners first. But let's face it, there's times where those fish just like slow death, don't they? It's a very deadly technique.
I don't like it.
You don't like slow death? Yeah. Well, some people swear by it. And especially out in the Dakotas and the Missouri River, and they love them out there.
What speed would you throw a slow death to? Would it be slower?
Yeah, slow death. I'm gonna pull a normal crawler harness, a spinner rate at about 1.25, of course, give or take. When I pull slow death, it's gonna be at about 0.8, 0.7, 0.8. Yeah, a little bit slower. So you really can't use slow death effectively at the same time you have somebody fishing a spinner rig. They're two different techniques. You know what I mean? So you can't say you go slow death, Terry, and I'll go with. You almost have to do the same thing. Any other questions? Like I always say to guys, as we get older, I'll speak for myself. As I get older, I don't want any more secrets. I used to hold these things tight to my vest and, real competitive, but as I get older, I want to share everything I know, and here's what I hope. I hope that by going through what we went through tonight, number one, you have a better understanding of Lake of the Woods, kind of maybe clears up some things, maybe it opened your eyes to some different opportunities you have on the Lake of the Woods. When it comes to the spinners and the crawler harnesses, I hope that you had a chance to take a tool and add a tool to your walleye tool belt. Because you know what, that's to me that's the name of the game, is that wherever you fish, you're going to be better walleye angler. So again, I want to thank you very sincerely for allowing me to come to your annual meeting. It's a great privilege, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Terry. Thank you very much.